Hey guys, it's Hannah and this is bookwormstalk, and I've entered my romantasy era, the romance fantasy era. I was resistant to it for a long time, but I was convinced. So I thought it would be a fun idea to read just the hooks, just like the little prologue or preface of a lot of different popular series that I have either read or are on my radar. I'm going to start with the book series that got me into the genre, which I'm sure a lot of you have read, A Court of Thorns and Roses. If you already read this and you want to skip to a different book, I'll have timestamps down below. It'll have the titles and obviously the timestamp. The forest had become a labyrinth of snow and ice. I'd been monitoring the parameters of the thicket for an hour, and my vantage point in the crook of a tree branch had turned useless. The gusting wind blew thick flurries to sweep away my tracks, but buried along with them any signs of potential quarry. Hunger had brought me farther from home than I usually risked, but winter was the hard time. The animals had pulled in, going deeper into the woods than I could follow, leaving me to pick off stragglers one by one, praying they'd last until spring. They hadn't. I wiped my numb fingers over my eyes, brushing away the flakes clinging to my lashes. There were no telltale trees stripped of bark to mark the deer's passing. They hadn't moved yet. They would remain until the bark ran out, and travel north past the wolves' territory, and perhaps into the fairy lands of Prithian, where no mortals would dare go, unless they had a death wish. A shudder skittered down my spine at the thought, and I shoved it away, focusing on my surroundings, on the task ahead. That was all I could do, all I'd been able to do for years. Focus on surviving the week, the day, the hour ahead. And now, with the snow, I'd be lucky to spot anything, especially from my position up in the tree, scarcely able to see 15 feet ahead. Stifling a groan as my stiff limbs protested at the movement, I unstrung my bow before easing out of the tree. The icy snow crunched under my fraying boots, and I ground my teeth. Low visibility. Unnecessary noise. I was well on my way to yet another fruitless hunt. Only a few hours of daylight remained. If I didn't leave soon, I'd have to navigate my way home in the dark, and the warnings of the town hunters still rang fresh in my mind. Giant wolves were on the prowl, and in numbers. Not to mention all the strange folk spotted in the area, tall and eerie and deadly, anything but fairies. The hunters had besieged our long-forgotten gods, and I had secretly prayed alongside them. In the 8 years we'd been living in the village, 2 days' journey from the immortal border of Prithian, we'd been spared an attack, though traveling peddlers sometimes brought stories of distant towns left in splinters and bones and ashes. These accounts, once rare enough to be dismissed by the village elders as hearsay, had in recent months become commonplace, whisperings on every market day. I had risked much coming so far into the forest, but we'd finished our last loaf of bread yesterday, and the remainder of our dried meat the day before. Still, I would have rather spent another night with a hungry belly than myself satisfying the appetite of a wolf, or a fairy. Not that there was much of me to feast on. I'd turned gangly by this time in the year, and could count a good number of my ribs. Moving as nimbly and quietly as I could between the branches, I pushed a hand against my hollow and aching stomach. I knew the expression that would be on my 2 elder sisters' face when I returned to our cottage empty-handed yet again. After a few minutes of careful searching, I crouched in a cluster of snow-heavy brambles. Through the thorns, I had a half-decent view of a clearing and the small brook flowing through it. A few holes in the ice suggested it was still frequently used. Hopefully something would come by. Hopefully. I sighed through my nose, digging the tip of my bow into the ground and leaning my forehead against the crude curve of wood. We wouldn't last another week without food, and too many families had already started begging for me to hope for handouts from the wealthier townsfolk. I'd witnessed firsthand exactly how far their charity went. I'd eased into a more comfortable position and calmed my breathing, straining to listen to the forest over the wind. The snow fell and fell, dancing and curling like sparkling spindrifts, the white fresh and clean against the brown and gray of the world. And despite myself, despite my numb limbs, I quieted that relentless, vicious part of my mind to take in the snow-veiled woods. Once it had been second nature to savor the contrast of new grass against dark, tilled soil, or an amethyst brooch nestled in the folds of emerald silk. Once I dreamed and breathed and thought in color and light and shape. Sometimes I would even indulge in envisioning a day when my sisters were married and it was only me and father, with enough food to go around, enough money to buy some paint, and enough time to put those colors and shapes down on paper, canvas, or the cottage walls. Not likely to happen anytime soon, perhaps ever. So I was left with moments like this, admiring the glint of pale winter light on snow. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done it, bothered to notice anything lovely or interesting. Stolen hours in a decrepit barn with Isaac Hale didn't count. Those times were hungry and empty and sometimes cruel, but never lovely. The howling wind calmed into a soft sighing. The snow fell lazily now, in big fat clumps that gathered along every nook and bump of the tree, mesmerizing, the lethal, gentle beauty of the snow. I'd soon have to return to the muddy frozen roads of the village, to the cramped heat of our cottage. Some small, fragmented part of me recoiled at the thought. Bushes rustled across the clearing. Drawing my bow was a matter of instinct. I peered through the thorns and my breath caught. Less than 30 paces away was a small doe, not yet too scrawny from winter, but desperate enough to wrench bark from a tree in the clearing. A deer that could feed my family for a week or more. My mouth watered. Quiet as the wind hissing through the dead leaves, I took aim. She continued tearing off strips of bark, chewing slowly, utterly unaware that her death was yards away. I could dry half the meat, and we could immediately eat the rest. Stews, pies. Her skin would be sold, or perhaps turn into clothing for one of us. I needed new boots, but Elaine needed a new cloak, and Nesta was prone to crave anything someone else possessed. My fingers trembled. So much food, such salvation. I took a steadying breath, double-checking my aim, but there was a pair of golden eyes shining from the brush adjacent to mine. The forest went silent. The wind died. Even the snow paused. We mortals no longer kept gods to worship, but if I had known their lost names, I would have prayed to them. All of them. Concealed in the thicket, the wolf inched closer, its gaze set upon the oblivious doe. He was enormous, the size of a pony, and, though I'd been warned about their presence, my mouth turned bone dry. But worse than his size was his unnatural stealth. Even as he inched closer to the brush, he remained unheard, unspotted by the doe. No animal that massive could be so quiet. But he was no ordinary animal. If he was of Prithian origin, if he was somehow a fairy, then being eaten was the least of my concerns. If he was a fairy, I should already be running. So I'm gonna stop there. I freaking love this book so much. This whole series, I finished it all. It's great. I'm so excited for the next book. So, I'm going to move on. I'm going to jump away from Sarah J. Maas for a second, and I'm going to go to From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Elmrentrout. I have not read this one. They found Finley this eve, just outside the Blood Forest, dead. I looked up from my cards and across the crimson-painted surface to the 3 men sitting at the table. I'd chosen this spot for a reason. I'd felt nothing from them as I drifted between the crowded tables earlier. No pain, physical or emotional. Normally I didn't prod to see if someone was in pain. Doing so without reason felt incredibly invasive, but in crowds it was difficult to control just how much I allowed myself to feel. There was always someone whose pain cut so deeply, was so raw, that their anguish became a palpable entity. I didn't even have to open my senses to feel, that I couldn't ignore and walk away from. They projected their agony onto the world around them. I was forbidden to do anything but ignore, to never speak of the gift bestowed upon me by the gods, and to never, ever, go beyond sensing to actually doing something about it. Not that I always did what I was supposed to do. But these men were fine when I reached out my senses to avoid those in great pain, which was surprising, given what they did for a living. They were guards from the Rise, a mountainous wall constructed of the limestone and iron mined from the Elysian peaks. Ever since the War of the Two Kings ended 4 centuries ago, the Rise had enclosed all of Macedonia, and every city in the Kingdom of Solace was protected by a rise. Smaller versions surrounded villages and training posts, the farming communities, and other sparsely populated towns. What the guards saw on a regular basis, what they had to do, often left them in anguish, rather it be from injuries than from what went deeper than torn skin and bruised bones. Tonight they weren't just absent of anguish, but of their armor and uniforms. Instead they donned loose shirts and buckskin breeches. Breeches. Still, I knew, even on off-duty, they were watchful for signs of the dreaded mist, and the horror that came with it, and for those who worked against the future of the kingdom. They were still armed to the teeth, as was I. Hidden beneath the folds of the cloak and the thin gown I wore underneath, the cool hilt of a dagger that never quite warmed to my skin was sheathed against my thigh, gifted to me on my 16th birthday. It wasn't the only weapon I'd acquired, or the deadliest, but it was my favorite. The handle was fashioned from the bone of a long-extinct wolven, a creature that had neither been man nor beast, but both, and the blade, made of bloodstone, honed to fatal sharpness. I may yet again be in the process of doing something incredibly reckless, inappropriate, and wholly forbidden, but I wasn't foolish enough to enter a place like the Red Pearl without protection. the skill to employ it, and the wherewithal to take that weapon and skill and use them without hesitation. I'll go ahead and stop there. Next book on the roster is Throne of Glass, another Sarah J. Maas. I have not read this one, though. The names in this, actually in the whole video, I'm probably mispronouncing things. After a year of slavery in the salt mines of Andover, Selena Sardonyth was accustomed to being escorted everywhere in shackles and at sword point. Most of the thousands of slaves in Andover received similar treatment, though an extra half-dozen guards always walked Selena to and from the mines. That was expected by Ireland's most notorious assassin. What she did not expect, however, was a hooded man in black at her side, as there was now. He gripped her arm and led her through the shining building in which most of Andover's officials and overseers were housed. They strode down corridors, up flights of stairs, and around, until she hadn't the slightest chance of finding her way again. At least that was her escort's intention, because she hadn't failed to notice when they went up and down the same staircase within a matter of minutes. Nor had she missed that they zigzagged between levels, even though the building was a standard grid of hallways and stairwells, as if she'd lose her bearings that easily. She might have been insulted if he wasn't trying so hard. They entered a particularly long hallway, silent, save for footsteps. Though the man grasping her arm was tall and fit, she could see nothing of his features concealed beneath his hood. Another tactic meant to confuse and intimidate her. The clothes were probably part of it, too. His head shifted in her direction, and Selena flashed him a grin. She looked forward again, his iron grip tightening. It was flattering, she supposed, even if she didn't know what was happening, or why he was waiting for her outside the mine shaft. After a day of cleaving rock and salt from the innards of the mountain, finding him standing there with 6 guards hadn't improved her mood. But her ears had pricked when he introduced himself as the overseer to Cale Westfall, captain of the Royal Guard, and suddenly the sky loomed, the mountains pushed from behind, and even the earth swelled toward her knees. She hadn't tasted fear in a while, hadn't let herself taste fear. When she awoke every morning, she repeated the words, "I will not be afraid." For a year, those words had met the difference between breaking and bending. They had kept her from shattering in the darkness of the mines. Not that she'd let the captain know any of that. I'm going to stop there. I'm interested. I want to read this series. I'm a little hesitant because it's YA, but ultimately I know I'm going to give it a try because I like Sarah J. Maas. Speaking of her, we're going to read another one. Actually just finished this whole series. This is the first Crescent City book, House of Earth and Blood. Sucker's long. Takes a lot to get into this one, but the first book was very good. I didn't like the second one so much. First one was really good though. There was a wolf at the gallery door, which meant it must be Thursday. Which meant Bryce had to be really goddamn tired if she was relying on Danica's comings and goings to figure out what day it was. The heavy metal door of Griffin Antiquities thudded with the impact of the wolf's fist, a fist that Bryce knew ended in metallic purple painted nails in dire need of a manicure. A heartbeat later, a female voice barked, half muffled through the steel. "Open the hell up, B, it's hot as shit out here." Seated at the desk in the modest gallery showroom, Bryce smirked and pulled up the front door's video feed, tucking a strand of her wine-red hair behind her pointed ear. She asked into the intercom, "Why are you covered in dirt, and you look like you've been rootling through the garbage?" "What the fuck does rootling mean?" Danica hopped from foot to foot, sweat gleaming on her brow. She wiped at it with a filthy hand, smearing the black liquid splattered there. "You know if you'd ever pick up a book, Danica." Glad for the break in what had been a morning of tedious research, Bryce smiled as she rose from the desk. With no exterior windows, the gallery's extensive surveillance system proved to be her only warning of who stood beyond its thick walls. Even with her sharp half-fey hearing, she couldn't make out much beyond the iron door, save for the occasional banging fist. The building's unadorned sandstone walls belayed the latest tech and grade A spellwork that kept it operational and preserved many of the books in the archives below. As if merely thinking about the level beneath Bryce's heels had summoned her, a little voice asked from behind the 6-inch thick archive door to her left, "Is that Danica? I don't know how to say her name, but she's a favorite of mine. Labaha? Labaha?" "I call her Lily." "Yes, Lily." Bryce wrapped her hand around the front door's handle. The enchantments on it hummed against her palm, slithering like smoke up her freckled golden skin. She gritted her teeth and withstood it, still unused to the sensation even after years of working in the gallery. From the other side of the deceptively thin metal door of the archives, Lele warned, "Jasipa doesn't like her in here." "You don't like her in here," Bryce amended, her amber eyes narrowing toward the archive door where the tiny fire sprite she knew was hovering just on the other side, eavesdropping as she always did whenever someone stood out front. "Go back to work." Labea didn't answer, presumably drifting back downstairs to guard the books below. Rolling her eyes, Bryce yanked open the front door, getting a face full of heat so dry it threatened to suck the life from her. and summer had only just begun. Danica didn't just look like she'd been rootling through the garbage. She smelled like it too. Wisps of her silvery blonde hair, normally a straight silken sheet, curled from her tight long braid. The streaks of amethyst and sapphire and rose, splattered with some dark, oily substance, reeked of metal and ammonia. "Took you long enough," Danica groused, and swaggered into the gallery, the sword strapped to her back, bobbing with each step. Her braid had become tangled in its worn leather hilt, and as she stopped by the desk, Bryce took the liberty of prying the plait free. She barely untangled it before Danica's slim fingers were unbuckling the straps that kept the sword sheathed to her worn leather motorcycle jacket. "I need to dump this here for a few hours," she said, pulling the sword off her back and aiming for the supply closet hidden beneath the wooden panels across the showroom. Bryce leaned against the lip of the desk and crossed her arms, fingers brushing against the stretchy black fabric of her skin-tight dress. "Your gym bag's already sneaking up the place. Jasiba's due back this afternoon. She'll throw your shit in the dumpster again if it's still here." It was the mildest hell Jasiba Roga could unleash if provided. A 400-year-old enchantress who'd been a witch and defected. Jasiba had joined the House of Flame and Shadow, and now only answered to the Underking himself. Flame and Shadow suited her well. She possessed an arsenal of spells to rival any sorcerer or necromancer in the darkest of the houses. She had been known to change people into animals when irritated enough. Bryce had never dared ask if the animals in the dozens of tanks and terraniums had always been animals, and Bryce tried never to irritate her. Not that there were any safe sides when the Veneer were involved. Even the least powerful of the Veneer, a group that covered every being on Midgard, aside from humans and ordinary animals, could be deadly. "I'll get it later," Danica promised, pushing the hidden panel of the spring open. Bryce had warned her 3 times now that the showroom closet wasn't her personal locker, yet Danica always countered that the gallery, located in the heart of the old square, was more centrally located to the Wolf's Den over in Moonwood. And that was that. The supply closet opened, and Danica waved a hand in front of her face. "My gym bag sneaking up the place?" With a black boot, she towed the sagging duffel that held Bryce's dance gear, currently wedged between the mop and bucket. "When the fuck did you last wash those clothes?" Bryce wrinkled her nose at the reek of old shoes and sweaty clothes that wafted out. Right. She'd forgotten to bring home the leotard and tights to wash in her lunchtime class 2 days ago. Mostly thanks to Danica sending her a video of a heap of Merwood on her kitchen counter, music already blasting from the beat-up boombox by the windows, along with a command to hurry home quick. Bryce had obeyed. They'd smoked enough that there was a good chance Bryce had still been high yesterday morning when they'd stumbled into work. There was really no other explanation for why it had taken 10 minutes to type out a 2-sentence email that day, letter by letter. The thing is with this book, I could keep reading, and it's going to still take time to hook you. It's one of those things that you have to commit to reading. I think this is broken up into 3 or 4 parts. You have to read part 1. Like, you will be hooked. There's a twist that happens early. I won't say what it is, but it certainly wasn't expected. Last but not least, I have 1 left. This is a prequel, I've heard, to the from Blood and Ash series. This one is Shadow in the Ember. "You will not disappoint us today, Sarah." The words came from somewhere in the shadow of the chamber. "You will not disappoint Lasagna." "No." I clasped my hands together to stop their ceaseless trembling, and I breathed in deeply. I held my breath and stared at my reflection in the mirror, propped against the wall. I had no reason to be nervous. I exhaled slowly. "I will not disappoint you." I took another deep, measured breath, barely recognizing the person who looked back at me. Even in the dim, flickering light of the numerous candelabras placed around the small chamber, I could see that my skin was so pink I almost couldn't see the freckles smattering across my cheeks and the bridge of my nose. Some would call the blush a glow, but the green of my eyes was too bright, too feverish. Because my heart still pounded, I held my breath again, just like Sir Holland taught me to do when it felt like I couldn't breathe, couldn't control what was happening around me, or to me. Breathe in, slow and steady. Hold until you feel your heart slow. Breathe out. Hold. It didn't work like it normally did. My hair had been brushed until my scalp started to burn. It still tingled. The pale blonde hair was half swept up and pinned in place, so the massive curls fell down my back. The skin of my throat and my shoulders were also flushed, and I figured that was from the scented bath I had been made to soak in for hours earlier. Maybe it was why I found breathing so difficult. The water had been so heavily perfumed with oils that I feared I now smelled as if I'd been drowned in jasmine and sweet anise. Holding perfectly still, I inhaled deeply and slowly. I'd been groomed within an inch of my life after the bath, hair plucked and waxed from all manner of places, and only the balm rubbed over my legs and arms, and seemingly everywhere in between, had soothed the sting. I held my breath once more, resisting the urge to lower my gaze beyond my face. I already knew what I would see, and that was, well, Nearly everything. The gown, if it could be called as such, had been constructed of sheer chiffon and little else. The sleeves, which were nothing more than a few scant inches, rested on my upper arms, and the thin ivory cloth that had been draped and wrapped loosely over my body, the length left to pool on the floor. I hated the dress, the bath, and the grooming that had come after that, even though I understood the purpose. I was to entice, seduce. The rustling of skirts drew near, and I exhaled slowly. My mother's face appeared in the mirror. We looked nothing alike. I resembled my father. I knew this because I'd stared at the one remaining painting of him enough times to know that he too had freckles, and his jaw was just as stubborn as mine. I also had his eyes. Not just the color, but also the same tilt at the outer corners. The painting, hidden away in my mother's private chambers, was how I knew what my father had looked like. I'm gonna stop there. I'm interested enough. Told to Seduce? What is this? I haven't read a summary for this, because I don't know which of her books I'm going to read first. But please let me know your romantasy recommendations down below. I'm new to the genre, and I'm obsessed with the genre. I want to read all the things. So let's have a fun little discourse down there and share our favorite things. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.